Derek and Daniel are the grandsons of Daniel Morris Salter, who was part of Dr. Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project that went to the National Press Club in 2001. Daniel Salter claimed to have a military security clearance 38 levels above top secret, and his book was called Life with a Cosmos Clearance. That came out in 2003. Both Derek and Daniel are practicing mechanical engineers. They've been researching their grandfather's work and uncovering documents revealing the latest details about his work with the National Reconnaissance Office and some of the most sensitive secrets concerning UFOs.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome, Derek and Daniel, to the show.
Thanks for having us again. We're glad to be here.
It's been a year, I think, since we last talked, or just over a year. So there's been quite a lot that's happened. So for those people that aren't aware of your grandfather, why don't you kind of like start at the beginning and just give a short summary about his background and how he got to have this security clearance of 38 levels above top secret.
Sure. So he went into the Air Force in 1947, and shortly thereafter, 1949, he had his first sighting of UFO. This was at Warner Robins Air Force Base down in Georgia. He was a radar specialist, and he had a team working under him. They were sent to Warner Robins Air Force Base to run some test missions against Strategic Air Command to see if different things could show up on their radar systems. And someone sighted it out in the distance, a hovering craft, and there were three of them. And so he got the team to paint it on the radar to make sure it was there, validate everything. And then all of a sudden they took off and they were just gone. And on the radar, the speeds that they took off at were far beyond any technology that they currently had at the time. And so before they took off, he was actually able to get real photographs of it. Later, a courier came and took all the evidence, and it was never talked about again. So that was his first, I guess, initiation into the extraterrestrial phenomena. And from there, he started working in various different projects that had various higher levels of classification, working alongside people who were in these higher classifications. And through his knowledge he gained on those projects, he kind of gained more and more experience with that. He also had a cryptographic clearance, being a Conrad courier for President Eisenhower, carrying around the war codes. So he once he had that also gave him a lot of access to information at those levels. So various events throughout his career kind of increased his knowledge and his awareness and allowed him to work through these different levels to get these clearances through his career. He retired from the Air Force in 1968 and became an operative in the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, which was a secretive organization at the time, didn't come public until the mid-90s. Their cover for that organization is basically surveillance communications, but behind the scenes, they are one of the front organizations dealing with UFOs, crash retrievals, things like that. At his level, at 38 levels above top secret, which was the cosmic clearance, he said that it was primarily anything alien-related, UFO technology, and particleization, which essentially is the basis for time travel, as we're finding out. So, and then he was, like you mentioned, he became a witness in Dr. Greer's Disclosure Project in 2001, and he wrote his book, Life with the Cosmos Clearance, a few years later.
So in terms of this security clearance he had, now people in the US are probably familiar with the three levels of secrecy: confidential, secret, and top secret. And, you know, if we're thinking of like a filing cabinet, it'll be like you have three drawers. So where does the 38 levels above top secret fit in? Is it like, are we talking 38 drawers higher, or are we talking in that third drawer that as you open it up, there's kind of like compartments in it that are like, you know, divided that way?
I always I guess you get kind of both analogies are applicable. I would say, because they're all encompassed within the lower level. And when you get to these higher levels, this compartmentalized knowledge is compartmentalized. So these, when you're at the next level, you think that's the top level. You're not aware on a need to know basis of anything existing above you. So you may be at the 30th level and think you know everything, but in reality, there's more stuff going on, and you don't really find out about them until you need to know that, or kind of go into those ranks. And Derek, we have a chart on that. Derek, if you wanted to show it, we could.
Yeah, you can share. I can share that with you.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be very helpful.
Okay.
So, yep, this shows you a little bit more. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, down at the bottom, you might not be able to see at the bottom, but top secret's at the very bottom there. And then you have there's a grouping there of the top secret crypto ones as you go up. And up at the top there, you can see is cosmic, and above that is majestic. And, he goes into detail in his book about the various levels, but this is a diagram that we found online. It wasn't from his files, but it's the only thing that we found that kind of corroborates some of the levels that he mentioned in his book.
Okay. That's very helpful.
And I would say that at those higher levels, like you have, you'll see some of these older documents that he has in his collection, and you'll see terms like ultra top secret or cosmic top secret, majestic. So it's kind of interchangeable when it comes to the alien UFO topic, and just where you're read into in various projects, and what parts obviously that are compartmentalized that you get to see. The ultra comes up a lot too when you talk about the deep underground bases like Dulce and some of the insiders that came out saying they had that security clearance level. So I think they're interchangeable, and to say that any one is at the very top in those upper 10 levels, it's hard to say whether it's cosmic, cosmos, majestic. Our grandfather used cosmic and cosmos interchangeably when he talks about the title of the book compared to what he says at the Disclosure Project. And so, again, that just shows you how it's kind of related to each other and works somewhat together. You'll see as we go.
And so our grandfather was saying that at that cosmic level, there's only about during his time, there was only about 25 people in the world that knew things at that level that were into that knowledge. No president's ever been up there. If you can see on the chart, the president's down like I think level 17. So it's quite a very small, limited number of people who are up at these very, very high levels.
I see. So and all of those levels. Each one of them, you're not aware of anything higher than that, and so if you're level 17, you're president. You think, okay, this is it. I'm the person in charge. I know all the secrets, but there's actually another 20 levels above that.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Or at least they tell you, you don't have a need to know, and so. You don't know how many levels it goes above I don't need to know that information, even as the president, right? So that's kind of how it goes.
Okay. Well, that's very helpful to know. So you've also talked a bit about the Freemasons and your grandfather's involvement with the Freemasons, and they also have a kind of like different levels of initiation, and they know about these secrets. So how does the Freemasons fit into this whole web of top secret UFO-related projects?
That's a good point. And I have a slide that kind of represents that, but you definitely have a quite a relationship between that and the military having secret clearances, and you can even say that with the NASA, the NASA organization, and how many of those are Masons. Many of the presidents back in the 40s, especially Truman, and some of the others that had to deal with these topics and had to figure out how to keep it secret. Well, they all were Masons, and up to 32nd, 33rd degree. So our grandfather said that his grandfather was definitely a 33rd degree Mason. His father was a Mason, and he said he didn't really claim what what level he was at within that. But in a way, you are basically grandfathered in, you could say, when you have that in your line. And even our mom had an opportunity. Well, she was part of this Order of the Eastern Star. I'll show you that as well soon. But just goes to say that when you have those oaths within the world of Masonry and these secret oaths that are taken, then they trust you more or less to go to obviously have these higher clearance levels as well within the military. It just seems to go hand in hand. We'll see that a lot.
Were you going to share that slide, Derek, about the Masons?
Yeah, I can do that real quick. And I wanted to point this out because the Chief Master Sergeant is obviously the highest rank you can be as a non-commissioned officer, or within the, during wartime, that was his ranking. He was at the highest level, and he achieved that level just within a couple years after it became a new rank within the Air Force. But they attribute that even creating the Senior Master and Chief Master Sergeant ranking because of the explosion of technology after the World War II. But, we could say it's probably the explosion of technology after 1947. They just don't tell you that, but that's probably what happened. And he actually enlisted in the Air Force, or Army Air Force, in 1947, just a month before Roswell. So all this is going on. So from the beginning, he had the opportunity with his sighting that he saw early on to get read in at these higher levels. And then it's no wonder that he achieved Chief Master Sergeant so quickly after that time it was available. So I wanted to point that out. But when it comes to, these are just some of the slides. This is one that shows the ties to Masonry, that we have the ring of I believe his grandfather. It must have been his Masonic ring. Of course, you see the G, the square and the compass. Obviously, those are the main symbols there. And then you have the Order of the Eastern Star, and he had this in his collection. And this was that organization that was created in the mid 1800s, but it allowed now women to participate. And so our mom remembers actually being a part of this group or this chapter that she would go to maybe a couple meetings, but she wasn't forced to stay in it. And I don't think my grandfather was really forcing her to do that. And I think there's probably good reasons he didn't think that was necessary. So that's important to note.
Right. Now, what happens at the 33rd degree of Freemasonry in terms of you being given the opportunity to progress to higher levels where you're read into all of the secrets, as opposed to those at 33 and below that are not aware of the extraterrestrial kind of like ancestral connection to Freemasonry and the technologies, flying source of free energy, all of that?
Right. Well, there was just a quick excerpt about that topic they considered the Dulce papers, Dulce files, but our grandfather had a huge stack of that. I'm still going through it. It's a tremendous amount of information, but there was a section within this smaller summary of it that actually was through email chains back when the only way to access this information was basically an email in the 90s or early to mid 90s. And so he had some of those files, and it would discuss what would happen at those higher levels, where you would basically be, given the Bible, like you stated, and then told, this is, in order to move forward, you have to basically defame and spit on the Bible and basically denounce yourself from anything related to that, and in order to move forward. So the test is basically you either do that, and you either agree to do that and you do it, and then you're given access to some other higher levels, or you say, no, I'm not going to do that. But then they also could just say, okay, well, you passed the test, and you stay at that level of 33. You don't see some of those other secret levels above that. So it's kind of like you choose the dark side of the dark force, or the light forces that Star Wars is like. It's almost like that type of initiation.
Well, I know there's a lot of Freemasons who kind of like object to these characterizations of Freemasonry being connected to kind of dark stuff and Satanism. But I remember talking at length with William Tompkins, and his father was a 33-degree Freemason, but even though he was at that very high level, his father kind of ran into problems when he didn't agree with some of the things that the higher leadership did, and he was severely punished and kind of like lost a lot of things. So it just shows that even at that level, 33 degrees, that there's stuff above it where, you can get into a lot of trouble if you don't follow the program or their dictates.
Exactly.
So recently, President Trump, he ordered the National Guard and federal troops or federal forces, agencies and so forth to clear out Washington, D.C. In terms of petty crime, illegal immigrants and so forth. And a lot of people, including myself, were saying, well, this was just a cover for dealing with the kind of satanic network in Washington, D.C., and that Washington, D.C. is configured in this inverted pentagram kind of style in terms of the major roads. So what do you know about the connection between Washington, D.C. and Freemasonry?
I can go over a couple slides with you on that point. And it's funny that I'll just start with this slide, and you'll see how it relates in a minute. But it's just, this is what we presented actually in July of this past summer at the Full Disclosure Now conference. That was their second annual conference there, and we're happy to present for the first time there. But I was, when I put together one part of the slides towards the end, it was basically just about DC and the layout and why it looks like that. But the reason I even went down that road was because of some of the documents, trying to figure out what the address was for one group in particular that he was involved with. Now you see it's the NRO here on this business card. And then you see DCCCD, which is another organization, very secretive within the NRO, that is called, it stands for Development of Conscious Contact Citizenry Department. And that is where he would say Project Blue Book is basically a UFO cover-up type of program. Well, the DCCCD is a UFO loosen up type of program, meaning they're going to start to bring disclosure out slowly, drip, 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 however they feel it's necessary, meaning more sightings, more, whether you see a Tic Tac, whether you see a Black Manta or the TR3B or whichever designation it is, the black triangles. This is all forms of disclosure. And he said specifically, there is a reason for this organization to help bring disclosure about one way or another, whether it's going to be for more nefarious reasons like a false alien attack or invasion. That's one way of looking at it, but there could be the positive outcome, at least to get people more attuned and acclimated to this idea that we're not alone, and that we already have probably a lot of these visitors and possibly a lot of the technology, or that's kind of the idea. So this slide was just to show you kind of the rabbit hole I went down, and this is where it started, one of the slides, because you see this emblem. It's kind of like a coat of arms that he puts on the business card, and I was curious about that. But that kind of leads into some of these military orders and, like the Knights Templar and some of these secret societies. And in particular, it looks more similar to the Order of the Holy Sepulchre. You'll see it here on the left with the 4 stars, but 4 crosses is the original. But he put the 4 stars, kind of like another version of it, maybe a more celestial version. So that's just interesting to note that, and the ties obviously back to Jerusalem. So he knows that that's, at least in the Masonic and Templar history, it's very significant, and we're kind of seeing some of that played out right now. So that was one thing I thought was interesting. That coat of arms in the middle is from his German side, that name Darter, and I found that just has a kind of similar look, but it's very hard to see and recognize the rest of it there. So when I was looking at these other documents, you have obviously the main ones like the Majestic 12 documents. And I'll just point this out briefly, that was in contact with Ryan and Bob Wood and corresponding with them through email back in the late 90s, because obviously you know who they are. They worked with William Tompkins and helped get his information out and what his claims were. But they were trying to confirm they've been the leaders in trying to confirm and validate the MJ-12 documents. So our grandfather was in touch with them and knew that they would be able to help each other share this information, that he would be able to share information with them. And so these are some of the documents that I found in our grandfather's files. And this is where this other unit comes into play. HQ, Interplanetary Phenomenon Scientific and Technical Counterintelligence Unit, WA-25DC. And this is this actual stamp, I have it still, that he would stamp in all the documents that we have of his old files. And he would basically be saying, this is a stamp of authenticity to say, this is a true document from my records, from my clearance levels. I basically say, yes, this is true. This is a true document, or the information here is relevant and very much part of our history that we don't know about. So that was one magic document he stamped. So just to go on from there, I was curious about, what is WA-25DC? What does that mean? Well, I didn't realize this until recently, that even within this very well-known MJ Special Operations Manual that has been tried to be debunked over time and time again, and Stan Friedman talked about it. But Bob Wood and his son Ryan basically were able to say, this looks in all sense and purposes like a real true document. But you notice this Majestic 12 group and then the 25 DC Washington plus a date after that. So I started to see this as maybe there's an address assigned to this, but that was a neat correlation to the IPU, Interplanetary Phenomenon stamp that he had. So it's like at these higher levels that there must have been a group or organization dealing with this stuff. You've already known about this one with the license plate, obviously, that he had a physical license plate, and that actually had WA-25DC with the Internet Planetary Phenomenon group on that license plate. So again, more evidence that this was a real thing.
Yeah, well, just on that, because anyone can go to Office Max and have a stamp made up, a specialized stamp with anything on it, or you can get a custom made kind of like license plate. But in the case of your grandfather, I think you described earlier that you were in his truck or something when he just showed up at a military base and was able to go straight through, because they looked at that license plate and just said, okay, you can go right through. No questions.
Yeah. It was actually, the license plate was on the vehicle that he had gifted to my dad, his son-in-law. And my dad was not aware of what it meant or anything like that. And our dad is a civil engineer, and he was going to these various bases, and he was told ahead of time, it's going to take you at least a half a day to get the right clearances and paperwork done so you can get in there and work on this project. And, they waved him right through. And when he asked the guard on his way out, he said, he just pointed down to the vehicle and said, it's not an issue. Yeah.
Okay, great. So that means that, that license plate was acknowledged to actually convey a certain status to whoever was driving that vehicle.
Our dad was just a normal civilian. He had no military clearances or anything like that. Yeah.
Yep. Everybody said it'd take an act of God to get through that base, and he was waved right through. And above all that, it was Langley Air Force Base, which is basically one of the top bases and joint base, of the military on the East Coast, near in Virginia, just south of DC.
Yeah,
and so
I remember Clifford Stone said that Langley was where they operated one of the elite crash retrieval teams for Operation Moondust.
That would make sense. That would make sense if our grandfather was involved with those types of operations too. And we've been told by one of the people that we've gotten evidence over the years, and one of them was actually Will Nutter, or known as Johann Fritz. But he said from the files that he could see that our grandfather was almost as like the the predecessor to the Clifford Stone and his generation that he was working on. Our grandfather was kind of before that era in the same operations, and obviously probably saw that manual from the 40s or helped to get that manual developed. It was 1954 when that was came out. So maybe he had a hand in all those. All the ways to handle ETs and the cleanup operations. But that now getting to the point of what's this all mean and how does it relate? Well, this is where I finally saw Washington 25 DC, but it had the official address. And this is the Central Intelligence Group from 1947, at least for this document, that addresses that. And so, of course, if you go and Wikipedia this, who are they? They're the predecessors of the CIA, but they came out directly out of the OSS from World War II. So it was only a short period of time, actually, an organization. And so that's just showing you that it all leads back to the CIA and the groups that were formed in 1947 and after. But that IPU, incidentally, that Interplanetary Phenomenon Group was formed earlier, back as early as 1942 after the Battle of Los Angeles, or the LA raid, with that craft that would sit there, and they fired at it all night long, and 3 a.m. William Tompkins actually saw it happen when he was like 16 or however old he was. And he remembers that. And it was just quite a sight, of course, of our history of what happened. So anyway, those organizations were formed that long ago. I was like, well, that's interesting. Where's that address? It was actually here. They used to call it the E Street Complex. And that's the first time they didn't want to put the address of the CIA, but eventually they had to, and they made it an actual board sign, because the president and others were like, I don't want to be confused on where to go. I want to know how to get to you guys or where to find this, elusive building. So they finally had to put an address to it, I guess. So that just shows you what rabbit hole I went down. But then it got me curious about DC, and I wanted to know where some of these other, important buildings were and structures. This was just one more document before I get to that, an ultra document, and it had Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit, a summary from that group. So he also claiming that, this was an authentic document, and it actually references, I believe it references John F. Kennedy, and saying that he might be one of the few people that have more knowledge about this type of information than others. And this was before he became president, but it was pointing out facts like that. So this document's from 1960, approved by Allen Dulles, of all people, of course, the director of the CIA at that time. So anyway, I'll skip down to where I looked at Washington, D.C. in particular. Another JFK reference. I thought you liked Dr. Sala, in the fact that this is probably what the nail in the coffin that ended up getting him killed at the end of the day, because it was what, November 12th of 1963, just before his assassination, that he was putting out this memo that he wanted to have a joint effort with the Russians to basically go into lunar space, a joint space and lunar exploration with Soviet Union. And he wanted data sharing of all files, of all anything that, whether they're the knowns or unknowns, he wanted to make sure that it was clear between the US and the Russia what was something that we knew was identified craft and what wasn't. Otherwise, we could start a huge war with each other, or a Cold War, you could call it. So this was to prevent basically a Cold War from even taking place to begin with. And of course, they killed him for many other reasons too, but this was probably one of the main ones. And this is the map that I finally went to start looking for, what was the buildings and structures from the past, and how was the layout of DC, and why does it have that weird kind of structure to begin with? The way the roads are laid out, it just didn't make sense to me either. And I knew, and for some reason, I was just drawn to do this before the presentation in July. And sometimes I feel like I'm guided to, maybe even from my grandfather, as to what to bring up and what direction to go in. So I don't know, maybe he helped with this, but I saw that the Masonic building was over here. This is where the old Masonic building was. And it's funny that it's 33rd in in the legend as a reference, which obviously shows you that these Masons are part of the building of and the structure, the layout, and even the maps and putting them together. So that's kind of a Masonic little tip to say, hey, we're involved with all of this.
And this map was from 1893. If you didn't see the date, yeah,
1893. So I wanted to say, where's the new Masonic temple in DC? How was that related to what's going on now, or where would they pick that as a significant place? And so the Masonic building, or the house of the temple as they call it now, you'll see it at the top of this map, but I laid it out here to show you that there is this inverted pentagram that you've talked about, Dr. Sala. And of course, I think there's one section that's incomplete, but I drew it as to show that these are all actual streets, except for maybe that one section on the west side. But this just shows you that if you have this Masonic temple that's sitting up there, you take the center of this star and you flip it from where the White House is obviously the center point of the star at the bottom. But if you flip it upside down in the mirror image of it, then you're at the Masonic temple over here. So that's just kind of a significant thing to see. None of that's by accident, I don't think so. And as we're finding out where these locations are, even the Smithsonian, where the Masonic temple was originally, there's probably all sorts of underground passages and ways you can go in and out between each location. That's probably very common. I think we're finding that out, and maybe they found that out when they were going through the Smithsonian that Trump was kind of trying to get under control recently, I think. But this is just to point out that significance in the Order of the Eastern Star, even though it was created in 1850, well after the construction of DC, that was still such a very important symbol that was used for many hundreds, thousands of years, probably back in the relation to Egypt and Star Sirius, and how that ties to the Masons. We'll kind of get to that, but interesting to note that, and then the Pentagon too, obviously tied to this type of layout and the star itself. But
as far as the design of Washington D.C. is concerned, I mean, you got the inverted pentagram, you got the one section is missing, which has occult significance. A broken pentagram represents an invitation to Satan or the dark forces to come in. So what I mean, in terms of the rituals for these kind of like satanic practices and the Freemason connection to it, would you agree that a lot of that took place underground in these tunnel networks that they had there?
Oh, I would no doubt it probably did.
Yeah. And one thing we just recently discovered, last year, Dr. Greer finally released all of the Disclosure Project footage from 2001, not just the edited versions that they had for their DVDs when they initially released it back then. And looking at the entire footage, there was some stuff that our grandfather was talking about that wasn't in the initial stuff, so we had never seen it before. And one of the things he mentions is that the biggest threat that humanity has against it right now is actually Satanism. He was very clear about that there was very prevalent and kind of disturbing. That's Nancy Red Star, who helped him write his book, was really concerned about that as well. So what she thought would probably be the most shocking thing to people is the how prevalent that is and how big of a force that is behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's very important, actually, that your grandfather pointed that out in 2000, that, quote, the greatest threat that the American people face at this time is Satanism, because just recently, President Putin of Russia just put out an executive order confiscating the assets of international Satanism, which I thought was very interesting, because it showed that it wasn't just people in the white hats in the US who were fighting against this kind of global satanic network, that there are also Russians fighting it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Derek, I believe it's slide 21 if you're looking for that.
Yeah, I was actually trying to find it. Okay, here you go. So that, at the bottom here, towards the bottom, is where he points this out about Satanism being the biggest threat. And I mean, whether you believe in any of the aliens are real or whether they're here, I mean, we can all agree that there's some dark forces and people that believe that this stuff is real and it's playing out on the main stage now. You've got to be very programmed and brainwashed to not see it. So,
yeah, it's worldwide. You were just saying out over in Russia, and this was, our grandfather was saying this 20 years ago. Who knows how much it's grown and become a presence now.
Yeah, so, I mean, I remember reading a book, The Franklin Cover-Up, where it talked about Satanism in Washington, D.C., and how they would use children in these programs, both for the kind of like sacrifice, the SRA ceremonies, and also for compromising high-level politicians so that they would control them subsequently. And so, you can understand that if this has been going on for decades or even longer than that, that whoever runs international Satanism, they are part of the secret control system of the planet.
Yeah,
most definitely. And I mean, and we're just seeing a lot of this being played out. And I think the whole Epstein topic was what kind of brought my attention more or less to it, and connections there. And I don't want to speak out of turn and say, it's one country or group, but you can see the ties. I was going to get to that one other slide, by the way, on that topic. But just so you know, too, Dr. Sala, he did mention weather modification, directed energy weapons, what he called over the horizon radar that would be ways to use for warfare, thinning the ionosphere, and disrupting flight, creating earthquakes, creating storms, steering hurricanes, burning up a country, drought, floods. I mean, he knew of all that, and the Havana syndrome being used on either the military or civilians. So it's very real, and he knew of all that and talked about it in 2000, an original disclosure he did. So I did want to point that out. But
yeah, that was another thing that was not in that was in the unedited footage that we discovered.
Yeah, very, very significant that that somehow was edited out. It's like, why would Stephen Greer do that?
There's so much. I mean, and really, if you go now, it's finally out there since last year, I believe, or last summer or so. And I found this, and I was kind of blown away. And again, this was information that we were looking for over 20 some years. And I had asked Greer actually directly, and he said, "Oh, it's all on the website. Just go there and you'll find it." Which is obviously it wasn't true. So now we finally see what our grandfather said and the original video footage of him saying it. So it's quite amazing. I'm sure there's plenty more there now that he hasn't been open about, probably just because it's so much information. But this is obviously a big one to gloss over, I would say. So
yeah, well, I mean that's really shocking to me that he would edit that out. Given how important that is to understand how Washington, D.C. really operates.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it actually would go more or less towards his ideology that, there's only good ETs, right? I mean, that he's one of the few known to say that. And it's very hard to, I guess, I don't know who would believe that or buy into it with everything happening, because I think we can see that there's obviously dark forces, and that there are these other beings that align to those forces. When we talk about the different levels and levels of consciousness, levels of whichever dimensional levels, planes you can exist in, the lower levels, there's definitely the dark forces we're combating, and evidence for it. Even the fact that I had an encounter myself, so I really, as hard as it is even for me to believe it happened, but it happened. So with one of those types of reptilian type of beings. So for sure they are there. So the point is saying that is, yeah.
Do you want to maybe elaborate on this? Because we spent a little bit of time talking about the Freemasons and what happens at the 33 degree level. Do you want to talk about this connection between Freemasonry and Satanism?
Yeah, we can touch on it. I mean, again, it's not like all Freemasons are bad. That's not the case, and many of them are good. And there's, I'm sure, at the lower levels, none of them understand or had any idea that this is possible. But when you have secrecy, at the end of the day, you have infiltration, and I think our founding fathers knew that. I think they were trying to stay away from the Scottish Rite Freemasonry more than anything. I think that's kind of where it was brought in, and some of these ideas of the satanic aspect of that. And so there is a slide, actually, and this was just to briefly make the Zionist connection with the Masons and what's happening with Israel. And this came from the Master Dame, from Graham Hancock. So before I get to that your point, Dr. Salo, I just thought I'd mention that, and how Masonry is tied to the building of certain structures like the Pentagon. Even the Pentagon in 1941, it was built September 11th of 1941, 60 years to the day of 9/11. So some of these, the dates of when they're built, or the dates of when like an attack like that happens, is by no accident. It's almost like a ritualistic thing to have that hit at that time. And now that we know that it was done by people on the inside trying to make an enemy out of somebody in the Middle East, when really there's intelligence that you can show that knew of everything that was happening and when 9/11 happened. So I'm just making that tie. The 32nd degree Mason of Roosevelt, the 33rd degree of Truman, they were both the same 32nd, third president. And then also the final 4 degrees is 30 to 33 of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, but that's for the initiation of the Masonic Temple or Masonic Enlightenment, which is the rebuilding of Solomon's Temple. All that's very significant, and that was stated in the book. Just actually, this was a very end to a side note, kind of a conclude. What do you call it? This addition to the main chapters of the book. But they felt, both Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock felt it was very important to bring this up, because there's too many coincidences to just ignore it. After looking at all the structures and stones and way things are built, and connections to Egypt, the star Sirius. Laying up the cornerstone of these buildings, and just how the state of Israel has been evolved over the years, in the decades it's been developed, and the politics behind it. That it makes you wonder whose allegiance do we have, and is it America first or is it Israel first? And that's one of the big topics we see now play out on the main stage. So it would be remiss, I guess, to not make this connection with the Masonic type of lodges and at the higher levels, and the ties to Israel or the Zionist movement. So, and unfortunately, it probably had something to do with Charlie Kirk's, assassination as well, as we've seen it. So, I wanted to point that out. But the
bottom line here is that when it comes to these top secret or above top secret programs involving extraterrestrial life and technology, that Israel, the state of Israel, or at the least its intelligence services, the Mossad, is an integral part of that.
Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. And that's why I believe, too, that the Epstein files is why it's so controversial. It's the very, very tip of the iceberg of all the stuff happening and all the darker satanic stuff that is being used to blackmail. That's why every major politician, any major celebrity, probably in most cases, music or movie wise, goes through this ritual, whether they choose to. Usually they probably do. And they even say, I sold my soul to get to this fame and fortune. I mean, it's not a joke. And some say it's not really, they're selling whatever they're selling, but they're selling their physical, body and who they are to join these groups and basically have to do as they're told to keep that fame, keep that money coming in, all the rest of it. It's sad, but that's the case.
Well, there was that Dutch banker who described how he made, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars through being the banker for the cabal, the Satanists. But then and he was offered a promotion, but to get the promotion, he had to be part of some of these SRA rituals involving children, and he couldn't do it. He was a sociopath and breaking up a company, destroying the life of a entrepreneur who had built up a company from scratch. That didn't bother him, but it was like, he said when he saw what they were doing to the children, he said he couldn't do it. He had to, and they just destroyed his life after that, and he became penniless and so forth. So,
we actually on our YouTube channel, we just posted an interview we did a couple years ago with Sean Stone, diving into his docuseries he did called The Best Kept Secret, where he exposes a lot of this, all this satanic things, rituals, the networks behind pretty much everything in our society, and brings that to light. And then it's some very disturbing stuff if you haven't been exposed to it before. But by coincidence, we posted that from our archive. But it's a really, really fascinating docuseries if you ever have a chance to watch that. Best Kept Secret.
Yeah, and we actually have Samuel Chong, who helped to transcribe into different languages the Theuba prophecy as one side, which is a lighter topic, but he also helped to do what was it?
334 and 1 over 1,000 live.
Yeah. Exactly. That book came out. So he was at 331, 34 lies, which is the inversion of 666, basically. So that was all about the highest member of the Illuminati or the lodge, the Brotherhood Lodge, that he was. He wrote a book in German. He was a German, and so Samuel Chong transcribed that. And he actually went to Germany to try to find the publisher and get more information about who the author was, and found some interesting information about that. I met him at the conference, and he said there were some things he was willing to share, but maybe some that he didn't want to say for his own safety too. So
I read that book by translated by Samuel Chong, and it was a very eye-opening and kind of revealed the extensive training that these occultists in these lodges would go through that are involved in what we would consider to be Satanism. That it really is like it's like Sith Lord training, where they learn all about astrology, they learn about meditation, they learn about mind control, and that they're able to use their thoughts to manifest and manipulate people, and it's when you read it, it's like, wow. How does the ordinary person deal with this? How does the ordinary man in the street that's skeptical about so much deal with these kind of like satanic occultists that are so highly disciplined and trained?
Yeah, exactly right.
It's an incredible book, very eye-opening. And at these levels, these people at least in that organization, they were the total disregard for human life and just the way they put themselves above the rest of humanity, and the manipulation that they're able to achieve. And it's frightening. It's a really incredible amount of detail he goes into on how they progress through these different degrees, and it's lots of black magic, scary stuff for sure.
And that's important to note, because I think that there's conditioning happening throughout over the last 50 to 100 years, but you see, at least very much so in the US, the culture's changed a lot, and they're trying to get us used to those. Just basically say, okay, there is no God, or I am God, or I could say, we're going to create our God through AI and through the computer. So it's kind of that mindset and mentality that there's no spirituality, or we should ignore that for the majority of us. But when it comes to the darker sides of this, they use that idea of spirituality and black magic, and knowing that if you can manipulate and use the force, the non-physical type of forces that are available to you, then you can do a lot of controlling of the masses that way through whatever programming you want. So as long as we don't believe it's real, they continue to do it to us, and then we're kind of helpless about it. So I think that's on purpose. And the fact that we obviously have the business try to have more money, have more possessions, and that's our culture as well. So that the materialism side of it that drives these psychopaths to want to be leaders in our government, in our community, and everywhere. So, yeah.
Do you want to tell us about the connection between Sirius and the Sirius star system in Egypt with the Dulce files and
Sure.
DUMS?
That was the next step I was going to. You read my mind.
Okay, perfect.
Kind of ties in with the Masonic ties to Sirius and all the landmarks.
So bring up the slideshow again.
Sure. This was just an excerpt to show that our grandfather was in touch with some of these people like Steve Wingate and validating some of the documents. And Steve Wingate was the one, at least in this email or in the email thread, his documents were being shared, and I guess alongside our grandfathers, and they were corroborating that they knew what they were talking about. And it's interesting, our grandfather didn't talk about reptilians in the book. I believe he didn't want to scare people of what we've been told. He left out so much in his own book that he could have shared of what his probably direct knowledge is. But I think he did want to try to keep it at least somewhat digestible and not too heavy on the darker side of things. But that was just one letter we found. But this is the connection to those files you mentioned that I found very interesting, and how you mentioned the 33rd degrees of higher degrees, that then if you are accepted into that, you go on and you're basically working for these Draco, the reptilians, and the Greys are basically the subservience to the Draco as far as these files are concerned, as far as this security guard that worked at the Dulce base and maybe other insiders. But this is where this information comes from, and it's talking about the sub-global underground network that Phil Schneider talked about, and our grandfather knew very much about that. But it talks about the caste system of the Draco, the Greys, the different different types they are, the Dreptoids. And it mentions, before I get to this, it mentions that these beings were likely here for thousands of years. I mean, there's so many reports of that throughout ancient cultures too, that talk about even the dragon concept. We've had to deal with this throughout all of human history, and it even goes back to the Bible, obviously. So there's always some truth in that sense when it comes to stories, myths, the Bible. It's all coming from something, and so this makes sense when you start to add that up. That these reptilian or reptoids or saurian races that evolved from the dinosaurs, the dinosaurs went extinct, yes, but if they were able to continue or smart enough to go underground, then they would be surviving all these cataclysms of the major event from 65 million years ago. So imagine that played out, and now this is what we're left with. We're left with a whole other race of beings, and for whatever reason, they say that there was some agreement made that they would stay hidden from us, from the surface humans, because for whatever reason, whatever cosmic divine type of agreements made at the higher levels, I guess you'd say. I don't know, but they were only able to interact with us basically in very elusive ways, and only if we agreed to it, almost with this black magic type of initiation, can we get a glimpse into that world. So I think we're seeing that more and more. And so when it comes to the Satanism and those darker types of religions and cults, it's probably stemming from actual interaction with these beings, whether it's first just in a non-physical way, like we mentioned, or eventually having access to them directly. And I mean, you've heard the story, Dr. Sala, that there's even, a place in Antarctica that literally, like, what we would consider as Satan exists. There's a temple of Satan or Set, and you can go there, and supposedly some of these leaders have gone and seen that for themselves, and might have been why Buzz Aldrin had a heart attack when he came back. I don't know. But anyway, there's a lot of ties to this. So this is just saying that this has been going on for thousands of years, and you have the right wing pitted against the left wing. And in this case, it would be the National Socialist on the right, the global socialist agenda on the left. But they all go back to Bavaria. So one's very Christian-based, one's very Luciferian and type of satanic-based. But it's a Machiavellian type of, obviously, ideology where you're playing both sides, putting both sides against each other to get the same outcome at the end of the day. So they're collaborating with these extraterrestrials is basically what it's saying.
Now, I wanted to get your view based on everything you've researched with your grandfather's files, is whether at these SRA rituals that, I mean, you have a blood sacrifice, and typically a demon is summoned, but what is that demon that is summoned? And I would say that actually, rather than some kind of interdimensional metaphysical entity, that they're summoning a reptilian or a Draco reptilian, because one of the things that I've found is that the names of these Draco reptilians is very complex, but if you pronounce it correctly, that it's like energetically you bring them into your reality. So, and this would explain some of these occult ceremonies where they have these blood sacrifices, that they're kind of like pronouncing or chanting the name of what they think is a demon, but in fact is the name of a Draco reptilian, and then that being appears in the midst of that ritual and does what it normally does, and that's how they kind of like get their power and so forth. So what do you say to that?
I'm sure I think there's a lot of truth to that, and it makes a lot of sense. And there's actually, I can't remember his full name. I think his name's Nathan, but he's been on several podcasts. Share the link because I can't think of it, but he basically was from one of those families, that was a Luciferic satanic family, and was able to get out, and luckily was able to get out and start to share a story, and obviously accepted God into his life, and that's probably protected it and saved him. And I think that's true for in a lot of cases, that people that have been abducted and things like that and had these negative experiences, once they truly say, okay, if I pray to God, if I keep my focus and intentions on the light and the protection of these divine beings, of Jesus Christ, of Archangel Michael, if they do that, they seem to have protection. And that's what this guy Nathan was saying. But he was saying that he learned the language of these reptilians, that we couldn't just say it the right way if we even tried. There's no way. It's so distorted from our English language. But he actually had to go through a ritual himself to then learn the tongue and speak the tongue. And it took him actually being sedated or put under some type of drug and a true ritual to be able to speak that language, and probably summon as they wish to do, as they want to.
Yeah, the Lacerda files, I don't know if you've read about that, but that describes the complex names that the reptilians have, and how if you have to pronounce it correctly, otherwise you can get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, for sure. And who knows, maybe some of that, we don't know if it was reptilian, but it was probably similar type of, when it comes to the Sumerian, and who Hitler was actually channeling. And if you've read the Vril diaries that came out of Sean David Morton's series, what goes deep into that, was supposedly the actual diaries of what happened with the cults, with Hitler and the Black and the Vril Society, the Thule Society, what they were doing and channeling these beings. And supposedly that was a similar type of ceremony. Yeah.
Right. Well, so far we've talked a lot about the kind of like the dark agenda, the Satanists, how they monopolize energies, how they kind of pit humans against each other. It's all about driving up the conflict levels, creating wars, generating lots of loosh, and all of that. And now you have this Donald Trump coming in, and he seems to be doing his best to put out a lot of these conflicts, end a lot of these wars, and most recently the Gaza peace plan. Now, I mean, is this a sure sign that Trump is part of this movement to fight international Satanism?
I'll briefly answer it, Dan, but my take is that he's got to be very careful, and he's probably playing both sides in a lot of what he does. And but there's more and more signs that he's obviously working towards the light side, more than not. Even like if you follow Tyler and Aaron and Journey to Truth, they've talked about that, and he's showing definite signs of like, the Q movement was a real thing, and he was somehow involved and at least supports those ideas. And so that's very interesting how I've seen that recently.
Yeah, I believe that the real power struggle is something that we'll never see. It's behind the scenes. It's already kind of happened. And what we're seeing now is maybe the repercussions or the outcomes of that being put on the stage, and this, the various puppets of the world, leaders of the world are playing it out according to what's already taken place at a much more secretive, higher level that we're completely unaware of. So I think this is just me. I feel like the outcome has already happened, and they're just putting on the show of, for us to see how they want it to look, what the narrative looks like when whichever side is more in control or not takes that advantage.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been very kind of interested in watching how Trump is being kind of like marketed really as this man of peace that is bringing about peace all over the world. I mean, he talks now about 9 international conflicts that he's brought peace to, which, I mean, it's kind of like an exaggeration, but as part of a marketing campaign, it's almost like he's positioning himself for a position that doesn't exist, which is president of the world. And it's like, is he really positioning himself to become the first president of the world after some kind of disclosure where it's like, guess what, everyone, the ETs are here, they're out there, we need to be unified as a planet to deal with them. And so we're going to have a world president. And who do you want to be the world president?
Right. And this might be controversial to say, and I haven't said this before, but just knowing that how things are being played out and how they're putting him on a pedestal like that, if we know anything about presidential leaders or any world leader in any government, they're not the ones pulling all the strings. There's somebody above them doing that. So he can be put on this very high positive light, and maybe the dark side can use that to their advantage too. And maybe they can create this false prophet or leader to come and save us when that's not necessarily going to be the case. So I think we need to be very careful with that. And I think Trump does have good intentions and wants the best, but whether to say he can do all of what he wants at the end of the day to help humanity, I don't, nobody really knows until it happens, I guess.
Well, this kind of raises another interesting question, and I'm sure you've come across the idea of the Pindar. I mean, David Icke talked about the Pindar, and Bill Deagle did an interview with Kerry Cassidy and Bill Ryan on Project Camelot over a decade ago, I think, and he was told that the Pindar is the CEO of the planet. And I guess reporting to the off-world beings. And so, when you had the deep state in control of the planet, the Pindar was like a high-level Rothschild, and he would report to some Draco reptilian about, whatever the agenda is. But given this kind of like White Hats, Earth Alliance battle against the deep state and removing the deep state's resources all over the planet, could it be true that Trump has essentially, because he's the ostensible leader of the White Hats, have become the new Pindar? I just did an interview with Gene Decode that actually that came out today, and he agrees with that. That in addition to being the kind of de facto king of the British Commonwealth, and that's, the whole story about Trump visiting Windsor Castle and the royal treatment he was given, that Trump has become the Pindar because the deep state was defeated by Trump's side. So, anything you want to say to that?
I mean,
Dan,
I don't know. I don't know if Trump would be the one to, this Pindar person is actually communicating with the off-world, powers. I don't know that I would. I feel like maybe it's someone behind Trump, someone who is actually having those communications, and Trump is like the face of it, for the public. Perhaps that's my take on it. But
it could be very possible, yeah. And it's interesting that people tie Melania to kind of this. She's almost like the white witch, the good force that's protecting Trump and has ways to combat all of these other all the black magic, all the stuff we've been talking about, and how they can try to interfere with the good stuff that Trump's doing. So yeah, maybe it's a group, and maybe it's a group of those benevolent beings really coming in and protecting them and protecting their mission. So yeah.
So in terms of your research into your grandfather, you mentioned a few new things you found out. Anything in addition that you wanted to kind of like talk about?
I would say so, Dan. I don't I don't want to go crazy with time on it, but let's try this. Can you share the screen real quick, and I'll just point this out. So I'm just pointing out, these are the people more or less that we've got corroborating evidence from all these independent sources. And I hope that soon we can let everyone know who this anonymous person is, but they're becoming more and more well known, and definitely give credibility to all this, the testimony of the others and what they're finding. So just to say that our grandfather was involved in these higher levels at the very top since the early 50s, that's just kind of sums up what, and that's kind of what this anonymous person was saying. They gave the best kind of overview of where things are, and was able to have a direct channeling up to our grandfather. So that's some of the insights we found, that he was helping with the technology exchange between these groups. I mean, he basically went through all of the rigorous testing to be involved at the higher levels, have access to the technology, but was helping to try to figure out how to use it. And some of the higher ups from him at the time, what you would call them MJ12, I'm sure that most people would, but they were trying to figure out, how can we use this, and should we make these deals with these beings just to get ahead of the technology and be one step ahead of others. So supposedly that's what happened. And he, at the time, agreed to it because it was right in the middle of the Cold War, and not knowing where our future was leading to. But they agreed, at least more than obviously just him, but that was the direction to take. So maybe that spurred those agreements that MJ12 did, probably behind, without Eisenhower's knowing. So some of those things were pretty interesting. And again, he was saying 98% was not talked about, or 98% of his career was above top secret, and a lot of the information wasn't even talked about in the book. It kind of leads on if we were part of the programs or not, and wanted us to be tied to that. He obviously didn't like where they were going with that. So apparently me and my brother were possibly involved early on, but then he was able to try to get us out of that. He did not like how they are using children, and still do, obviously, even now in these programs. But that's a whole nother topic. But the most interesting thing and validation that we are having connections now with our grandfather is through this medium, Dina Mena. And she's not a medium by profession at all. This is just happens. She just has a really gift, a major gift. And I don't know, did we share that she connected to our grandfather back in the conference of Journey to Truth in 2024? I don't know, Dr. Sala, if we did talk about that with you.
I don't remember.
Okay,
not in this interview. Not in this.
Yeah. So that's the latest, really. That's that's been an ongoing development, because she is even now getting messages coming in and validation that it is him coming through. I don't know, Dan, do you want to quickly go over maybe a couple validations that you've experienced with this?
Yeah, this occurred. We randomly met her when we were giving a presentation over a year ago, and she saw our grandfather clairvoyantly. She's had this gift her whole life. She's been able to see entities that have passed, people who have passed. And so since then, she's had these very profound communications with him. A lot of it is personal confirmations, validating, things that only he would know about us. And then intermixed with a lot of that is information about the military, which she's not, in this realm of military anything. So a lot of it's foreign to her, but she relays all the messages to us, and we try to decipher a lot of it. But a lot of the things, like he told her about the storage unit where I'm keeping a lot of things for my mother from when my grandfather passed away in his storage unit. And she brought this up, that he had described the storage unit. He described the keypad on how to get into the storage unit and the locks that were on there. Even that there were blank canvases in the storage unit. As my mom was an artist, she had some blank canvases sitting in there. Like all these details out of the blue, and not even, we hardly know her. We only met her briefly, at this conference. Lots of synchronicities and things that have happened over this past year, confirming things over and over again. She saw him wearing a black beret. Derek and I didn't even realize that my grandfather consistently wore a black beret all the time. We weren't around him that often, but our mom confirmed that he always wore that. And we actually found a video that he made where he's wearing that black beret. Just random things like that are, have been spot on for, confirming the authenticity of who's coming through with this. And I could go on a lot longer about this, but it's very profound. But Derek, we can go through some of the information that we've gathered.
Yeah, this is a good summary. Yeah,
big confirmation about his involvement or in MJ12 in some capacity. What continually comes through. He was there was indications that he had been to Mars. He's shown himself to her on a submarine going to Antarctica with other extraterrestrials on board, and that he was down there, and he was he said there's good guys and bad guys down there, and he tried to stay neutral to see how much more information he could learn from them down there. He said there's a lot of negative stuff happening though with human test subjects and children, and a lot of stuff he didn't approve of. Another synchronicity, I had these for some reason, like I saw something on my Facebook that said something about Dayton, Ohio. I got a call from a number in Dayton, Ohio. All these things in 1 week, like 3 or 4 instances of something about Dayton, Ohio. So I asked her about it, if she wanted to, ask my grandfather about that. And immediately she saw, extraterrestrials being shot down over a base. She saw underground base below a base that was highly top secret, and our grandfather was working with benevolent extraterrestrials in these lower levels. She didn't know that Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was in Dayton, Ohio. She didn't know anything about that. That's, where Clifford Stone and others have said that they took all the retrieval crashes and things like that to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. We asked her about like the wing makers, because he wrote about that in his book, in the last chapter of his book, Life as a Cosmos Clearance. And so when she talked to him about that, he showed her him being in the ancient NRO site and using the caves and, putting his hands on the walls to actually facilitate time travel, and that only certain people were able to do that if he was kind of gifted. He had this extrasensory abilities that not everyone could turn on to be able to do these different time travel things. But she told us he talked about all the various different bases around the world underground, and a lot of stuff about technology, time travel technology and things like that we've been trying to piece together. So it's been very fascinating. And if it wasn't for these personal validations that were so, there's no other possible explanation that I could ever come up with of how she would know these things that were, only known within our family. It's just so unbelievable. It's hard to convey it, but.
and I can just tell one or two stories that just happened recently too. That's very interesting validation. And I put this in the slides too, but all the movies that he would reference and tell us, there's truth to this: Star Wars, Star Trek, Close Encounters, obviously. And you have Philadelphia Experiment, Fire in the Sky. But I had The Abyss in there as one of the ones I remember and enjoyed as a kid. But Dina had some kind of inkling to watch this movie. I don't think she remembered watching it, but felt inclined to watch it, maybe from connection with our grandfather, that's important right now. So it's interesting because you hear now about the undersea bases, and this movie was basically about the alien bases in the oceans, and that was a big disclosure movie on more on the positive side. So that was an interesting kind of confirmation of him coming in. He also talks a lot about consciousness right now, and I think tied to 3i Atlas. And I know you've had people on, Dr. Sala, talking about that. So I think that maybe is a tie to that the whole consciousness in us waking up, some kind of activation or some kind of, hopefully going into the right direction in our awakening process. And then finally, this is the last thing that just happened. I happened to find this medical record of our grandfather. And just after I looked through this briefly, I mean, there was nothing suspicious to me about it, other than I saw, were you exposed to radiation? And he puts yes. And we had no idea of any stories of him being around radiation or any reason like that. But then right after that, Dina's always text messaging me and my brother and saying, this is what's coming next. This is something else I just got a vision of. And I just read the next thing in line, and it was about him in a helicopter with a vial, like these little tubes, like kind of like the medical tubes that we would have. And she kept getting radioactive, like the term radioactive coming in. So it's almost like within that same time frame that I'm discovering this link to him and radioactive material, radiation, she's getting this message or vision of him with radioactive material. And the other thing that was interesting is she knew that he had something about his heel or part of his foot that had been injured. And he was in a helicopter. And I actually remember that story as a kid. He said the only time he actually had an injury in the military was in a helicopter, I guess a helicopter crash. It's the only way it would have been. And he injured his foot, his toe, or his heel. And that's all more corroboration right there. So very interesting ties.
Yeah. Well, I certainly think it's important that as we kind of like start to understand the big picture, that we use as many sources as possible. And I think people who communicate or channel or any kind of like communicating with the other side, people on the other side, like with your grandfather and this Dima, that is something that we need to consider it all, because the big picture is so complex, and I'm finding that no one source is ever conclusive. They all have problems, but if we get the big picture, we get multiple sources, we can triangulate. And that seems to me to be the most sensible way of doing it, triangulation. You get your documents, you get your whistleblowers, you get your channelers, you get your experiences, and you just triangulate as best you can.
And that's essentially what we did with those 8 different sources. Some of them had files, some of them was channeled material, past life regression type stuff, all these different people, and the amount of, people that had the same hits, remote viewing even, where they just had a number and they were like all these different people were looking at the same thing. They all hit the same thing about the UFO, the technology, the underground bases. It was just incredible. Yeah. I mean, that
was actually with Tony Rodriguez's team that did the remote viewing for us. Yeah.
Okay, so where do people go, Daniel and Derek, to if they want to get in touch with you or they want to find out about anything you've discussed so far?
They can go to our YouTube channel. Our show is called Shred the Veil. Our channel is called Clear Thought, CLR Thought, and they can find us there. All of our latest stuff interviews that we do with people, and a lot of it is about the research that we do with our grandfather and his material. So,
yeah. Right. And I was just I was going to say that, the reason we chose the name Shred the Veil, I mean, maybe my brother has a different reason for it, but it just seemed fitting for that's happening. That the veil is obviously being lifted in more ways than one. You can say the veil of secrecy in one regard, like President or JFK's famous speech about the secrecy, and he said the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. So obviously that veil is lifting, but also on a more spiritual side, and as well as the alien and disclosure side, because it's not black and white. It's definitely not black and white. We're seeing that, and we're seeing that as it's being played out. So we talk about the physical and non-physical realities of these beings, obviously, whether we want to call them ETs, aliens, but also the angelic realms, and that side of it, and how those forces are here, and the darker side also of those forces that are here. All of that is coming to a head right now, and it's kind of like, there's no holding back. Once those floodgates are open, we're seeing it all play out on the main stage, and we just have to stay grounded in our right minds. We have to start focusing, not just using our analytical mind, but use our heart. And there's actually a great philosophy that discusses that in the future, our minds, our thinking will not be with the brain, it'll be with the heart. And that's the true way to evolve in the right direction, is that we need to start doing that. And I think a lot of us are getting activated to do that. And we need more of us right now to combat these darker forces. So, yeah.
Totally agree with that. Well, thank you both, Daniel and Derek, for sharing this amazing information from your grandfather and for your ongoing research.
It was our pleasure. Thanks for having us. Yeah.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.